We think the power of story can transform and transcend almost any topic. In so many ways, we get to do something a bit deeper.
They understand the power of entertainment, the power of story, shaping the next generation of storytellers. I don't think there's many more things that are as important as that.
Windrider creates, convenes, and curates, sparking conversation through film. We create award-winning films with global impact.
For Windrider to be respected in the creator class is a unique gift.
Your vision is bringing voice to things that matter.
To understand and interpret and translate their experience through story. It's such an important thing, and I think Windrider is right at the forefront of all of that.
We convene hundreds of students and storytellers to encourage connection.
This summit has taught me a level of empathy that I haven't found at other film festivals. It's just really taught me to listen to other people's stories, to ask their perspectives, even if they don't come from the same walk of life that I do.
It's been amazing to be here and hear stories of people who really do bring their faith into what they do.
Because the stories that we consume, they shape what matters to us. They shape our identities in profound ways.
We curate inspiring content for year-round engagement.
Windrider curates films that illuminate what is happening in our culture and opens the hearts and minds of individuals in a unique way.
To have this content, and oftentimes short film format, has been amazing to see that everything really is theologic.
Windrider sets an environment where people feel safe to engage. Once engaged, they find themselves better off.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're so happy to have you here at the GBH Media Summit. I'm Alexi Cohan. I'm a digital producer here at GBH. I cover local politics, and I'm the lead producer and moderator on a monthly video series featuring Gen Z voters. This session is called Civic Stage to Silver Screen: How Digital Innovators Are Moving the Masses. Today, we will be exploring how creative leaders in the digital space bridge storytelling across platforms to support civic engagement in the community. These themes are critical now more than ever because creative disruptors aren't waiting for a seat at the table in legacy media organizations. They're creating their own. Today's conversation will be moderated by Cameo George, executive producer at American Experience here at GBH. Cameo will be joined by Wynter Mitchell-Rohrbaugh, who is a writer, digital strategist, and cultural commentator. She is the owner of digital consulting firm Pablo Jobs. Stephen Olikara, the president of Bridge Entertainment Labs, will also be joining the panel. Stephen is an entrepreneur working at the intersection of politics, media, and culture. Next, we will be joined by John Priddy. He's the CEO and co-founder of Windrider Institute. He's an entrepreneur and a Peabody Award-winning filmmaker. They will also be joined by Bill Hildebolt, the executive chairman of Gen.video, an influencer marketing platform with a focus on analytics and e-commerce. Please give a warm welcome to our panelists and enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Hello out there. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. I am so excited to talk to these four visionaries about your work, about the intersection between mission and message and technology. We, over the last 2-3 days, have been having a lot of conversations amongst ourselves behind the scenes, so I'm really excited to share some of what we've been talking about with all of you. I'm actually going to start in a slightly different place than I originally planned based on some of the discussions that I've gotten to sit in on today. A lot of what I'm hearing is this conflict between legacy media and influencers and creators, and it just feels like there's an interesting tension that we've been pointing to. So I just want to start out, for each of you, I think one of the overwhelming thoughts that I've had today and one of the insights that we've heard is that we are no longer the gatekeepers, right? Legacy media, we are not the gatekeepers. And that I think something that each of you are doing is creating pathways and developing pathways for your content and your audiences to connect without a middleman, like a network. So I'm hoping that maybe we can just use that as a table setter to start the conversation. Wynter, how do you respond to that when I say, we're the gatekeepers?
I think that the largest concern right now, especially in this climate, is how to disseminate who to trust. And you tend to sort of lean toward someone you have a familiarity with, or your parents always listen to Cronkite, et cetera, but you don't know who to trust now, today. I think one of the biggest things that I'm discouraged by is that I grew up in the same household as some of you, where my grandparents trusted a particular anchor or reporter, and then I grew to trust them. And then somehow that kind of got all mixed up in the shift from analog to digital. So now I'm trying to really explain to people that I work with and sort of help my clients understand that people look to you to trust. So they trust what you're saying, what the messages that you're delivering, and they trust your point of view. And when we're talking about news, and we're talking about journalism and the tenets of that, which I think everybody in this room is super passionate about, we have to start really putting our support behind people who are staying true to that, independent of where they are. Joyanne Reed no longer has a network show on MSNBC. Support her when she's putting out these posts and informing people on Instagram. Molly Jong Fast, she kind of bounces, back and forth to different panels. Support her, watch her when she's on air, respond to the content that she's producing. Heather Cox, I think Richardson, she's somebody that I absolutely believe, she might seem inflammatory to some, but she's doing the work, and she's putting it out daily, and she's doing it on her own platform. And she's being suffocated by Meta, and calling out Meta. Call out Meta. Meta absolutely had a department that was supposed to be protecting freedom of speech and also fact-checking, and they eliminated it. And nobody calls out Meta. So that's my big platform right now. Call out Meta. They're one of the largest distributors of news content. They are one of the largest distributors of misinformation and fake information. So start calling out these companies that just absolutely abjectly refuse to stand on business and talk about the truth and eliminate the bullshit.
Well, just building on that, I want, before going into my remarks, want to thank Cameo and GBH and my fellow Wisconsinite Audrey, who is a catalyst, I think, in many ways for this panel. And I just want to build on Wynter's comments about trust, because I think the next frontier is sense-making and trust building when it comes to media. In addition to my role at Bridge Entertainment Labs, which is focused on working with filmmakers and storytellers, which absolutely has a gatekeeper problem, and I'll get to that, I'm also a political commentator. And I've found in the new media, the independent media space, whether it's going on a podcast or a YouTube show, there's so much more space to breathe. There's a lot more space to be yourself. And I think that's actually a positive development, because more than ever, we do need nuance. We do need multidimensionality to the stories that we're telling, because America is not a binary. We're human beings with complicated sets of beliefs and identities. And so we need space in the media to be able to share that. And I honestly did not feel that when I would go on some of the more legacy media outlets. It was a lot of the producer kind of scripting and shaping the story that this is the narrative that we want to promote. And so in that respect, I think this shift that's happening is good. At the same time, the new media space is very much influenced by the algorithms that we have right now. So I think as we start talking about the sense-making and trust-building conversation, we also need to be having a conversation about the social media algorithms. Because I'm a big free speech person, and I also think that the algorithms need to be regulated in the same way that we look at cigarettes or other drugs in our country. I think right now, the algorithms really fuel what I call a division industrial complex, a set of forces that cause us to hate each other all the time, make us believe that progress is not possible, and profits off of that. Our contempt is their profit, and I think that's not productive either. So this is a new landscape. There's some positives, but there are also some negatives, and I think we need new policy to account for that.
And John, I think what Wynter and what Steve are talking about are obviously some of the biggest problems with legacy media. I promise everyone we're not just going to spend this session beating up on legacy media. I'm very happy to be here as a part of GBH and to be hosted by GBH. So that's important. But what I do think is interesting and what I hope that we'll get to in this conversation and what I experienced in talking to the four of them during this week is that there are a lot of things that we can learn from each other, and there are things that maybe started with legacy media that a lot of you are building on, and it's like you're capitalizing on the promise. On the promise of journalism of old, of storytelling of old. And so, John, to segue to you, I think what's so interesting, again, going back to this gatekeeper question, is that you are, again, shrinking the space between content and the intended recipients. And one of the things that I learned that you do with Windrider that's so important and so impressive is that you say you bring together these groups of students, seminary students, college students, young people to watch media in all forms, and then you talk about it from a perspective of faith, but without all of the stereotypes and all of the baggage that sometimes is a part of the faith conversation in mainstream media. So maybe can you come into the conversation from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, in our work, personally, I've always thought that politics was downstream of culture. And whether it's legacy media or any media platforms, politics, and especially presidential politics, is primary to the starting point of the conversation. What we've learned over the last 20 years, especially when having conversations with young people, is the power of story as the starting point has really been refreshing and works well in our context. Because when you start with a story, and we focus a lot on short films because in short films there's time for conversation. And so we believe that if you start with the story first and work back to the issues, you take a person someplace they haven't been through the power of story, introduce them to someone they have not met through the power of story, and then all of a sudden empathy breaks out. Now you're in a live setting. So it's interesting that it can go from digital to live convenings back to digital. And so that's how we've sort of focused on our convenings, is to start with story and work backwards.
And Bill, you're a pioneer in the digital space. I think that the one thing that we all agree on is that digital has been the catalyst for change and has enabled people to consume media in a different way, people to talk directly to the audience again without this middleman. So can you talk a little bit about, first of all, like, how did you know 20 years ago, 25 years ago? Like, why was that the direction that you wanted to go in?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I want to set my bona fides. I was on the board of directors at WUNC back in the 90s, so I'm a big believer in the mission of GBH and public media, and, not here to, to say that's the old way, this is the new way. And the first thing I'd say is, the way we consume information is always changing, has changed for 3,000 years. I just finished Yuval Harari's new book, Nexus, which is all about information, and he talks about this incredible technology that's 3,000 years old that was the Bible, and how Bible changed in many ways, information architecture for the 3,000 years, intervening, and how that was a technology at the time. And so, the idea that change is ever coming is I think one thing we should all just say, like, yes, that's true. It's always going to be evolving. I think what I saw 25 years ago in the very early beginnings of the internet, I was on the board of directors of a company that was one of the first user-generated content companies. And at the time, this was the days of Pathfinder, for those of you who remember Pathfinder, which is basically Time Warner saying, oh, amazing, we don't have to mail out magazines anymore. We can just post them up here and people will consume them that way, and that's going to be cheaper and better. That's not what the internet was. The internet was a two-way street. And so when people could start to, contribute their own information, you very quickly saw the revolution that was going to occur. And the second thing that happened down that path was, Amazon, much to the chagrin of most authors at the time, said, we're going to let people write reviews of your books and we're going to post them. And like, oh my God, it's going to be terrible for sales. Instead, what did it do? It drove sales to the moon. In fact, the user-generated content company I was on the board of, the big insight, it was called Planet Feedback. And the idea was consumers could give feedback on products and services. And we tried to sell that as a subscription to the brands. They were like, are you kidding? We don't want feedback. And then it all changed one day. The CEO, who I'm still friends with, still work with, came into the boardroom and he said, turns out more than 50% of the things people are saying about brands are positive. We all fell off our chairs. Like, wait, people want to say nice things? People want to contribute in this positive kind of way? It was stunning. It changed the business and it changed the course of my thinking and my career, that yes, we want to embrace people into the conversation. And I think that's carried through to today. So yes, the barriers to entry are down and the doors are opened up, but there are still impediments, there's still hurdles, there's still things like the algorithms, right? And I think right now the algorithms, for many good reasons, are getting slammed because they do tend to popularize the sensationalist things. But what's really happening there? The algorithms are celebrating good stories, not necessarily truthful stories, not necessarily positive stories, but good stories that people want to consume. That's what influencers are tapping into, and I think that's what any of us who wants to communicate, which by the way does not include me, I'm not an influencer, we have to think about our audience and the stories we tell. And Wynter mentioned trust, which I think is a big theme for all of us. I've built my career, it was the very beginning. Trust, this user-generated content stuff will only work with trust. Once we violate a consumer's trust, we will never get them back. And I equated, in my simplistic brain, truth and trust. They sound alike. They seem to be related. If I tell the truth, I will be trusted, and I can tell more truths to more people. Those two things are not related. Trust and truth are not synonymous. And who proves that? Donald Trump. We trust Donald Trump. We don't think he tells us the truth. And we all, if we want to be storytellers and have our stories repeated and consumed and interested in, we need to start there. What's a story that's going to resonate and be amplified? Because a story that doesn't resonate or get amplified is worthless. It's a tree in the forest. Mm-hmm. Yes, I want you to tell stories that are truthful personally, but that is secondary. The first is earn trust. That's the one I'm still trying to figure out, and that's why I'm not an influencer, just a guy running a company with influencers. They've tapped into trust, and they are trusted by their audiences, and so start there. And then your stories can grow. And again, I hope you use that for good and truth, but don't mistake the two. They're not the same.
And Wynter, you talked about this a lot, that at the core of your business, your strategy, the work that you do with celebrities, people in Hollywood who have a mission and values that they want to impart, that for them, when they connect well, it's because people trust them, and it's because they're authentic.
Yeah.
But so Bill is talking about authenticity is not necessarily in lockstep with truth. But for you, I think you feel like it has to be. So how do you sort of respond to that thinking?
I think that, look, I come from a journalistic background, and that's what I bring to the table when I work with my clients. And, my clients aren't influencers, they are celebrities, personalities. I work with a lot of comedians. I know a lot of you have heard of them, John Mulaney, Wanda Sykes, Margaret Cho. They're all sort of rooted in being authentic. and being themselves. And whenever you divert from even a little bit of that authenticity, take John, for example, personal setbacks, and then moving forward through that, you can only do that because people rely on you to be authentic about it. And that's something that I can help support as their advisor and consultant and strategist, is because I'm thinking about, what is the news going to say? What are your fans going to say? I'm monitoring all of that as their representative. And the difference between that being like a publicist and the difference between that being like a manager and agent where they have a fiduciary investment in it is that I'm just kind of like speaking for the people. And that's sort of like why I love doing what I do. I'm a fan first. I have to be a fan. If I'm not a fan of you, then I don't want to work with you. And then I have to be the fan in your camp. And that's why they trust me, because I'll be authentic. I'll tell the truth. I'll fib a little. I'll be like, it's not that bad. It's a little bad. Here's how we're going to navigate it. And I think it's because we are seeing that, back in the 50s and 60s, comedians were living in it. They were dealing with what the news was reacting to, right? They didn't care that they were selling out clubs all over the country, and some of their comedy may have been a little blue. They were like projecting their own issues, right, onto, the comedian. They're to this, they're to that. Same thing with Richard Pryor. I see John as being like, this might sound crazy to some people, like a Richard Pryor-esque. And it is very much like you have to connect with your audience and be true to them. And that's in anything you do when you have a platform that large. Whether you're in news, whether you're a celebrity, whomever, you have to connect with your audience and keep it true to them. I think that's something that people on the right do really well. They tell them what they want to hear. They tell them exactly what they think they should know. And they don't care if it's real or memorized. They don't care. The thing that I enjoy about my clients is that they want to connect with them and meet them at the moment. And that is something that I really try to do. And I use my background in journalism. I use my background in marketing to say we have to meet people where they are. We can't amp up here, because that feels really, one of my clients is Marissa Tomei. She constantly says, does this feel like Eat the Rich? Does this feel like I'm saying, you guys go do the work and I'll sit back here for my little, what should I be doing? Tell me. Or here, Wynter, this is what I want to be doing. So I think when you work with people who have a platform, and that does include news organizations, finding resources and ways to be nimble, and it takes a little bit more effort, and it's really freaking annoying, but being sort of like at the forefront of what the mission and the movement is, and trying to diversify, and I'm not talking about culture, diversify how you can create that story and that narrative and be able to do that storytelling even if you don't have all the tools. And I think that's exactly why I love working in social media and digital media, and I think you can speak to that with your influencers as well, is that we will find a way to make it happen with as little resources as possible and make it come together and make it shine. And that's really where I like to be. I really am focused on truth.
And Steve, you work not just in Hollywood and entertainment, but you're also coming to it from a political perspective. And so what we have all seen over recent years is how both politics and Hollywood sometimes, the message is, and the crafting of the message is so critical. And sometimes it's, at the core of it, it is what the message is about, like what you're saying, but it's also just so much about the delivery. So can you talk a little bit about how we can all, whether we're at a network, whether we're at, a nearly 40-year-old documentary series like me, how we should think about the crafting of the message in order to reach the maximum number of people?
Yeah, two thoughts on that. One, by the way, just as we're talking about new and old, I should also mention that I'm a former public radio DJ, big supporter of public media, and I think that this issue obviously is in the news, and I'm an advocate for public media getting its funding. But a couple interesting takeaways so my political background is I founded a national organization called Future Caucus, which is the largest cross-partisan organization of young elected leaders in the country. We work together on issues ranging from clean energy to criminal justice reform, and the whole idea being that can these young elected leaders transform some of these old debates and pass legislation? And the main takeaway from that is yes. And one of the two takeaways to your question, Cameo, one is Teddy Roosevelt has this great line that people don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care. And this goes back to the authenticity and trust points that we've been making, that as a messenger, you have to somehow also demonstrate why this is personally matter to you. And then the other line I'll share with you is the idea that it's not what you say, it's what people hear. And I think that too often, whether it's in elite media bubbles or elite political bubbles, there is not only an ivory tower effect, there's an echo chamber effect too. And that echo chamber may be ideological, but it may not be. But it is a question of whether or not you're breaking out of your own echo chamber to go directly into communities and hear from people. And I don't see that enough. When it comes to the media industry, most reporters, journalists, producers I've worked with all live in not just a couple cities, but a few particular neighborhoods within those cities. And it is true that our perspective is shaped by our lived experience. And so when I'm thinking about stories that I want to tell, content I want to create, messages I want to put out there, I'm always going back to my lived experience growing up in Wisconsin. Like, is this story resonating with where I came from? And will it resonate with people who I went to grade school with in Wisconsin? And I think that addresses a couple of those ideas of, is this resonating with people across the country, not just your own tribe? And also that you have a sort of you have some skin in the game, that you really care about this thing. Right now, we, as in Bridge Entertainment Labs, we're advising Pixar in a film that will come out in a couple of years. And a lot of the times when we're discussing a particular issue in the film and how can this resonate with audiences, how do we make sure that we don't have any blind spots in what we're discussing? Generally, the answer is lean on lived experience, like really listen to people. And I found that really helps to create the kind of nuance that we need in our messages. And that applied to politics as well. Like some of the freshest language that people in DC would say, like, how did you come up with that message? Well, it came from listening to how real people talk, not just how pollsters are slicing and dicing people and sort of manufacturing a message, like hearing the true nuances of how people think. And I think that ties to the theme of this whole conference, of bridging the divide, because we are so much more interesting than the binary divisions that are presented to us. And we have real political differences in our country, but people are also what I call heterodoxical thinkers, in the sense that you might, if you think of our president or you think of major political figures, you might agree or disagree on a particular issue, but there might be another issue where there is common ground. I think increasingly we'll live in a culture that doesn't incentivize that, but I think that most people I talk to have a combination of views, are willing to be more a la carte. And there's this group in our field called More in Common, and they did this research study, and they identified a group of Americans who identify as part of the exhausted majority. And based on their reactions, as I just said, that I sense that some of you identify with the exhausted majority. And that's over 2/3 of Americans who are really tired of this toxic polarization and want to have real conversations across difference and find solutions where we can build new ideas together that can strengthen our country. That audience, I think, has a deficit of content that's speaking to them, and we need to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so, John, one of the things that again was so interesting to me about what you do and how you bring together people to discuss content. Steve is talking about how there's a lack, right? There's not enough. There's a lot of content out there. There's not always a lot of great content out there. And so a lot of what we talked about was the power and the skill of curation, right? Like how you bring good content to people who are willing and ready to receive it and discuss it. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like when you're planning your convenings. Like, how do you decide what to show people? Like, how do you decide what film or short video that you're going to make that you want to show that you think will encourage positive conversation, that will not get us bogged down in this toxic polarization?
It's a good question, and I think based on what's been said, I should say my name is John, and I am in support of public broadcasting.
Like everyone, please.
Yeah. So, thank you. I wanted to make it clear. Curation, I think there is so much content out there, and you're right, not a lot of great content, but there's a lot of good content. I think for us, in fact, we have Team Windrider there and our programming team. There's Ryan and my brother Ed and my son. They are very focused on finding content that's not necessarily what I would call didactic, that starts with an issue right at the forefront. Rather, it starts with a story that takes us somewhere. And I think curating stories that crack open a conversation. I'll give this example. Windrider was created with the concept that we would take seminary students from the Christian tradition from Fuller Theological Seminary and undergraduate film students who wanted to be filmmakers from Biola University, which is a Christian, evangelical Christian school. And we'd go to the Sundance Film Festival, we would watch Sundance films, and we would come back and talk amongst ourselves. That was the big idea. And 22 years later, what we've learned is storytellers, we don't know what perspective they're coming from. We don't know what if any religious faith they have, what their politics are. We don't know. We judge the film first. And what we learned with storytellers is they were very eager to talk about things besides what would be the kinds of Q&A questions they would get at a film festival. At a film festival, people ask, what was it like to work with John Mulaney? What camera did you use? What was the budget of the film? But in our context, because it's mostly younger people, college-age people, they would ask a filmmaker, who are you? Why did you pick this story? How has it changed your mind? How has it transformed you? Yeah. How do we help? And so what happens is you start getting a dialogue and conversation with the artist, with the storytellers. And I think that's how we try to curate. Try to curate stories where the filmmaker gets to talk about what he or she wants to talk about, which may be an issue, may not be an issue, but it's really coming from the perspective of the artist. And to stay away from the kinds of questions which young people are way more open-minded and together than we give them credit for. The polarization of that age group is a bit of a myth in our observations. We're known for our ecumenical group of people, but also interfaith outreach as well. And everybody gets along just fine because curating the right kinds of stories also helps everybody to have something in common.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'd actually love to follow up on something that you said. I think a lot of times we sort of put the younger generation of media consumers in a box that's not that flattering, right? And so you talked about how your team is, there's an older contingent, but like the majority of your team is, in that college age, they're much younger.
Yeah.
I know both for Wynter, for Steve, you also, you're working with a lot of young people. Bill, I know that a lot of the influencers who you work with on your platform who are doing, whether it's reviews or whatever it is, like there are a lot of people who are of that younger generation who don't trust media, who have wildly different viewing and consumption patterns, but that's not always bad. And so I'm hoping that each of you can just talk about like why we need to not beat up on that younger generation while we're thinking about, like, we're not trying to say, this is how I watched the news or TV, and the fact that you don't is a problem, and you should start like doing it the way that I do. I think all of you have a different perspective, and you're just like, we want to meet people where they are, and we want to recognize that different isn't bad, right? So can you just talk about that a little bit?
I mean, I think it's important as a young person to gravitate towards any medium that pulls you in. What you're being delivered is the issue that I will have. But the thing is like there's beauty in Twitch, there's beauty in YouTube, there's beauty in Discord, there's a community. And I think, Cameo, to your point, like they are looking for community and like-minded individuals. And they want to consume that content, and they want to have fun while doing it, not being judged, etc. I think it's important. I don't feel like I don't have to say I support public broadcasting because I grew up on public broadcasting. KQED is like my whole life, but I think the concern is that how do you fund that? How do you connect on that? And I think that there are ways to do that. I had to step outside of myself as a young journalist, and it was hard, and nobody believed me when I said we were converting to a digital environment. Nobody wanted to hear that. I mean, I got shut down by billionaires, bosses everywhere, and then it happened. And then I'm like trying to tell you, it doesn't mean that you have to lose the audience or become something that you're not. It's just subtle shifts. And I honestly think, like, Bill, you can speak to that. Like, there are just subtle shifts that you can implement into your organization without ignoring sort of like the reality of it. I don't love all things digital, to be honest. There's a lot of things I miss about analog. So I feel like, you know, Bill. Bill.
I mean, yeah, speaking to youth is obviously critical, right? They are the ones whose minds are forming, and they are trying so hard to figure it out. And I think, you know, we've got to give them that, you know, that credit. And sort of one example that sort of to me brings it home, one of the most popular channels on YouTube when it's projected on the 60-inch TV in the living room is Dr. Mike. And Dr. Mike, for those of you who don't know, he is an actual doctor who is on YouTube that has something like 15 million followers. He's got his own degree of controversy, but he's a real doctor working very hard to dispense through social media actual medical facts and truths. And it's a very popular channel for my stepkids who, you know, range from 3rd grade to 7th grade. And, you know, I probably wasn't watching a whole lot of medical programming when I was their age. So it is not like some race to the bottom for them. They're trying to figure out the world that they're in. And I think, you know, you guys have all said such amazing, perfect things. It's, you know, meet the audience where they are. People want to be heard. They want to be seen. That's why social media influencers are so popular. They feel like they're peers. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and again, even that's a little bit not truthful because they're famous influencers and my stepkids are not. But at least it's authentic and it feels authentic to them. And so they are receptive to those stories. And then we just pray that those stories are actually positive, beneficial ones. And so we all have the same problem with, you know, how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? And there's a lot of chaff. But you know, we are praying that occurs and that eventually those truths, those good positive messages come through, and that if nothing else, that this generation will have one heck of a filter between what's right and what's wrong when they ultimately get to whatever stage of maturity we're theoretically at. Mm-hmm. So, you know, and again, to me, what I love about this is everyone's talking about stories. It's just really about stories. We only learn through stories. We don't learn through facts. We learn through stories and what they communicate. And again, that is the beginning, the middle, and the end is storytelling.
Yeah. Right. In whatever platform, mm-hmm. whatever form of media mm-hmm. you practice, mm-hmm. stories are at the core. And that is very heartening to hear from all of you that from whatever perspective you're coming from, story is at the center of it.
Yeah.
And has been since the campfire at the beginning of civilization.
Yeah.
And that's not changing.
Nope.
So all it is the digital is just a new version of the campfire. And if you want to know where the future is going, figure out what the next version of the campfire is.
Yeah. At Bridge Entertainment Labs, we talk about how we are the stories that we tell ourselves. And I think when it comes to this Bridging Divide mission that we have, and it's the theme of this conference, it's like stories also define who's the we in our democracy. And that's why I think, just tying it back to young people who, when I go to college campuses and talk with Gen Z, one of the most common phrases I hear is, where can I just hear it straight? Because they feel like they're being fed something instead of just shared information. And it's so hard. And then the next follow-up question is, where do you get your information from? And I usually talk about the importance of consuming a diverse media diet. There are organizations in our field like allsides.com that actually rate media organizations and where they lie ideologically. I'm proud that a couple media outlets that I've worked a lot with, like The Hill and News Nation, are right in the center, but there are others as well. But I think that's part of why there's this disconnect with traditional information and media organizations and young people, because they feel like they're just not, they're being fed a narrative as opposed to being fed information that they can use. And I've definitely found, anyone who works with young people probably knows this, always have a good BS radar. They know when they're being manipulated as opposed to just being empowered and listened to. So yeah, I really think that we need to reinvent a lot of these sort of media paradigms to embrace not only like technologically where young people are, but to hear these calls to have information and not narrative.
And can I just say something? They also need third spaces. And we need to bring back curiosity. I think growing up as a kid, watching KQED and all the programming that was delivered to me encouraged me to go outside and go look at a butterfly, go look at flora and fauna, go travel someplace else, want to go to a crayon factory. Like those types of media, those types of media that's being pushed out, they always drove towards being curious. And I think that if you are, a lot of this content is they're telling them, yeah, and then they're taking that and then just sort of sitting with it. But if there is a way to sort of build on storytelling and create that sense of wonder and awe that we had as youth, I think, when you're watching someone sitting in a room playing video games, watching them playing, it's like, that sounds nuts. That's not really real, but they connect to that. But I would love to see a world where we one of my favorite YouTubers, I forgot his name. He's my favorite, I forgot his name. But I know him because he goes on the road and goes to these towns that are, I've never been to the Appalachian, a holler out there. And I watch it every single time and I find it fascinating. And it is not like no, it's like, wow, this is another life that I have no experience in. And I'm fascinated by how they live. It is not something that I'm judging. I'm simply consuming so I can have an understanding. You know what I mean? And I start having conversations with people who know that area. Curiosity. I'm curious. I just want somebody to answer to my curiosity. And that's what I'm super stoked that I hope happens. Once we have third spaces and people can speak together amongst one another, and that's where I think stories will come from. I think that's the future too.
Yeah. Well, regarding third spaces, it's been interesting because coming out of the faith community perspective, one thing we do really well is convene.
Oh, yeah.
We get together. And so it's interesting now that you could take a digital platform, which has much of our content, but even so much of PBS content, which can be curated into an existing program for a convening that's already taking place. Right. We oftentimes shy away from convenings as being, or affinity groups, even outside of our context. But there's a lot of desire for content to be programmed into different kinds of events, whether they're small or large. And so I think that's where curation comes in, that's where I think convening comes in, that's where I think conversation comes in. But then because of the digital availability, it can continue to be pushed out so that the folks that are gathering live also know how to access the same content for maybe to have a hang at their house. So I just always advocate for where people are gathering together, to use the power of the digital world to create an environment where a story could be shown in a live context.
Just to connect John and Wynter's comments, which I think are so on point, is I have spent over a decade in this field to bridge divides in America and build social cohesion. And there's so many beautiful convenings where people can sort of confront their biases, be brought, their minds opened to approach things with that curiosity that, like Wynter was talking about. And the question has always been scale. And that's why I think the storytelling and media conversation we're having is so essential. And the experience that you were describing, Wynter, is like this concept of transportation, where storytelling at its best transports you to a lived experience that's different than your own, and your mind and heart is open to experiencing it.
Yeah.
And that is what allows us to scale conversations that build empathy. You know, like, I've been part of so many dialogues in rooms like this, of this kind of size. We're sitting at a table like this, and there's this sort of beautiful, energetic release where you realized, oh, I don't have to hate that person as much as I've been told. And you realize, okay, we can connect on a human level. That kind of empathy building needs to be done at scale for our democracy to exist in the future. 100%. And I think media is the solution. That's why I think, you know, when we think about democracy reform, we're often talking about gerrymandering and process kind of issues and money and politics, and I've been involved with all of those efforts. Media is a democracy issue for that reason, because unlike any other medium, it informs, obviously, but also can create a level of empathy and connection in a diverse democracy that is essential, and that's why this conversation is so important.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to add to that. I think that something that all of you were talking about, that media is the media that we create is the starting point, but the discussions that we have around it is a really beautiful ending point. And so for me, as the executive producer of American Experience, we make documentary films. That's great. I love that. We get to just dive into story. We bring together experts and historians and people who share their lived experiences. But there's something that's so beautiful about when we get to take our films out on the road and do in-person screening events. And, you know, one of our films from this season is called Change Not Charity. It's about the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we were talking about that film and Crip Camp as well, another really stellar film that was on Netflix. They have a co-director in common, Jim Lebrecht. And something that you said to me, John, about when you saw Crip Camp, and I hope that you'll see Change Not Charity too, but when you saw Crip Camp, you were like, oh, this is within my lifetime. Like, suddenly on my college campus, like, I'm seeing people with disabilities who now suddenly the campus is being retrofitted and it's being changed so that everyone can participate. And so I had that same kind of experience in the making of our film and the showing of our film in different venues. We had a screening at Gallaudet University, which is the premier university in the U.S. for deaf and hard of hearing students. And suddenly, like, I mean, obviously I'm a Black woman, so I'm used to being a minority in certain situations, but suddenly I was in a situation where we had a screening event where if there were 100 people in the room, 98 of them were deaf or hard of hearing. So it just changed the whole way that I experienced a film screening. I've had millions of film screenings, right? I've been doing this for 30 years. But suddenly, it's like I'm imagining what it's like to watch a film, one, to see myself represented, but also, like, it's a silent screening. And so that changes everything, right? And so it's just these opportunities to put yourself in someone else's shoes. I think it's exposure, it's curiosity, it's building empathy, it's building a bridge. Like, there's something that's really incredible about that. So that's one of the places my mind went when you were talking about that.
I mean, I think now more than ever, we know what it's like. We know what that people are telling us what their experience is like. But when I was growing up in San Francisco, I was born and raised in San Francisco, and I thought every place, even though I was well-traveled as a child, I still felt like everybody thought like we thought in San Francisco. You know what I mean? I was in that bubble. I thought everybody went to school with multiple racial, and cultures across the diaspora. I thought everybody had friends who had mommies or just daddies. I just thought that this is the way it worked. And then it was like a culture shock. And that sounds crazy because I think I'm very intelligent, but it was a culture shock when I moved to even Los Angeles. And I was like, y'all don't roll like this. And then you go to another city, y'all don't roll like this. And it's okay that that's not maybe where it is for everybody, but I wouldn't have been able to evolve past or get outside of my bubble if I hadn't been curious, if I hadn't consumed other media, if I hadn't talked to other people. So to your point, 100%, you may not like what you hear, but it's probably better to hear it. I kind of want to know more than I want to not know.
Absolutely. And when you're hearing, that doesn't mean you're giving up yourself or you're giving up your identity, you're giving up your convictions. No, not at all. You're sharpening your perspective on the world. It enhances your ability to be a change agent. Exactly.
Yeah.
You're learning about our country, and you have to work across many differences if you want to move an agenda. And by the way, one other benefit to listening with curiosity that often doesn't get talked about enough are the personal health benefits as well. Because when you're approaching conversations with a lot of contempt, it releases multiple stress hormones, and it reduces the capacity of your immune system. When you're listening with openness and you're building this kind of connection, it's healthier for your body. So in addition to the many benefits out there, I think the health benefits should be there as well.
Yeah.
I love that. I see that that the microphone is, if there are questions in the audience, there's a roving mic. Great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Johnson, Professor Emerita in Journalism from Boston University. I was curious whether all this new generative AI stuff is having any kind of impact on the kind of work that you guys do. For instance, are you grappling with deep fakes or misinformation being generated? Or are you using any Gen AI tools in the kind of storytelling that you do?
Ooh. Okay. I use ChatGPT because I have ADHD. As you see, I'm on my phone right now. I use it to help organize it, but where I draw the line is trying to build something creative on it. And I actually told somebody the other day, please don't do that, because we know what the issues are. I know that's not what everybody's doing, so I'm curious how you guys are thinking about it, because I work with a lot of original artists who are being, affected by this.
Yeah, I'm working with a lot of filmmakers who are confronting this question right now, and I've seen a variety of responses. Like one is working on a more historical documentary that was able to use AI to generate scenes that he otherwise would not have had, or they would have had to sort of find other solutions for it. And so when I saw that, I thought, okay, this is great that he has access to generate scenes like that. And it's, by the way, amazing, like in terms of just fed in a couple photographs, put in a few prompts, and it created a very realistic scene. On the other hand, I think there are a lot of questions too about how is every creative thing going to be a derivative of each other? Is there true originality there? And then obviously not to mention the jobs that it's taking away from creatives as well. The thing we know is that it's coming for sure, and so it's just more of a question of how we adapt to it. And obviously, AI was very much at the center of the strikes in the entertainment industry, in between the actors and the studios and that type of thing.
Does your filmmaker feel obligated to disclose that they're using AI to create some of these scenes? I mean, obviously, if it's like 1700s pre-film, we'll understand that.
Yes,
but
yes. That's kind of how he's using it, and I think that's actually really, I think he does feel obligated, but I also think that's part of this new set of norms that we have to create. And I see this a little bit on social media where if something is AI generated, some people will disclose that. I think in the filmmaking world, there should be standards that people agree to so that people know. So I think it's a good idea.
That's what's in flux. You're in the midst of trying to figure out what to do about that. But also, the film industry, it started with the democratization of production equipment. So, you went from these massive cameras and then to these smaller cameras. Then it went to democratization of post-production. Now your editors can live anywhere and be anywhere. And then now we're seeing democratization of distribution. And now we have AI, which we have to balance. What's interesting to me about it, if it's done well, if we can figure out a way to do that with integrity and do it with ethics, is democratization of media is a good thing, right? More people providing content into a conversation is a good thing. But AI, we know so little about what it will be. Yeah. But even when we went to a producers conference at the Sundance Film Festival 20 years ago, my brother and I, and there was a panel like this, and they said nobody will ever watch a movie on something like this, and they held their phone up.
Because it's so small.
Yeah, nobody will ever watch a movie, and I thought, I'm not sure if that's true. But, so we'll see what AI means for all of us. It's a very good question.
I mean, I'm gonna jump in. There's a funny story. I knew the world had changed when I went to my basement, and I just bought a brand new widescreen TV, and my son was sitting on the couch looking at it, holding his phone up and watching his phone with the TV off in the background. And I was like, wow, the world has really changed, like impossible. I think that the question on AI here's really interesting. I could write a song using AI right now. If I played that song for you, you'd be entirely uninterested in it because we're not interested in AI creating songs for us. But if John used that same AI and it was like, John made this song with an assist from AI, I'd be like, well, that's great. It's still John's song. And so where I don't know how AI plays out. It's going to be great. It is going to be great, right? And so we know that AIs can make us love them. We can have a romantic relationship. Not me personally, of course. But people have romantic relationships with AIs. That's already happened. But what I do wonder, will we ever trust AI?
No.
And I think you're right. I certainly want to believe that. I think that we will never trust it. But then if I twist the question and I say, could we have a board member of our company who was an AI, who we basically just trusted to bring us facts? Hey, AI, we're facing this issue. We got a lawsuit. What does the facts tell us from a synthesis? We might trust that opinion, but we would trust it different. We'd still want the humans on the board. And that's where I don't know what happens with AI, because I do think we will never trust anything that is not human. That's a fundamental truth, I believe.
Exactly, you're right.
And so I don't know what happens with AI, because I think we will let it deliver us facts, but I don't think it knocks influencers or anybody in this room out of the box, because we will only trust other humans. So it's a question of how does the tool get used. By the way, if you use AI to do things and it betrays our trust of it delivering us facts, oh my God, hell hath no fury. And so some of this stuff has to play out, but I think we'll never trust AI the way we trust humans.
I mean, if you look at Ryan Coogler's explanation about the film strips that he used, and you can just Google Ryan Coogler talking about Kodak film, AI can't replicate that passion and that dedication and commitment. And that is why that movie is #1. That is why they're bringing it back to IMAX, even though its window is closed, because passion drove all of that. We've seen millions of horror movies. We've seen millions of vampire movies. We've seen millions of Jim Crow era films. Passion drove that medium. And 5 or 10 years from now, we'll see what happens. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Please expand on that.
Better.
Are you talking about AI? Oh.
Replicating the passion. It could turn out something just as great as writing stuff in 10 years.
But will you care? Let's say it's the best movie you've ever seen, but it wasn't created by a human. I mean, They're better at us than chess, but we still watch human chess match, not AI chess matches. They will be better at us than sports, but we will not watch robots play sports. It's not interesting. We don't empathize, and we don't trust them
It's like
in the
humans
same
going
way.
to space, too.
Yeah.
We care a lot more if a human is going to space.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
And
real space, not like glam squad space.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want to hear your take on that.
John's wife gave my take, and we're best friends, and everything she said I agree with.
All right. On that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon for this session. Thank you to Bill. Thank you to John. Thank you to Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you to Wynter.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.